we'll be having some dialogues, and from what I heard, some games in the later part of the panel. So we're excited to have you all here and hope you're having a great week so far with all the meetings and all the panels. Let's not wait to get started. Let me welcome the Yuan.
Thank you, Junction. Hi, everyone. Happy afternoon. Hello, hi. First of all, thank you very much. I know it's heavy rainfall out there, so anyone that's here is the true love of us. So, thank you. So let's first chill a little bit. I would like to ask you to do a little bit of imagination practice. Let's all close our eyes. Have 2 deep breaths. Another one. Okay, with your eyes closed, I want you to imagine a future in 2040 that you are in it. What does the future look like? What are you doing? Picture it, think about it. Open your eyes when you feel ready. Okay. Some of you are still in the future. It's okay. Now I ask a question and think about it to yourself. Do you like the future? Do you want to live in that? I see a lot of nodding. Do I see a shaking of? Do I see a no? Definitely no. Okay, you look happy. So any of happy friends want to share the future that you want to live in that? Any of you want to share a little bit? Oh, yes. Thank you.
It's an on. Yeah, I didn't imagine either a good future or a bad future because I don't know what it's going to be, and it will probably be a mix of both, but I want to be here anyway.
Whatever future you want to be in it.
Yeah.
That's very optimistic. Thank you. Anyone else want to share? Someone said yes. Oh.
Yeah, I just visualized I was playing football with my son, and was he's not born yet, but he'll be born. He'll be born soon. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, so looking forward to that.
I'm not gonna say that. I was imagining a future with my loved ones and just people around me being happy and healthy and sitting in nature and being very close to nature.
Thank you. That's all very beautiful. Anyone from this side want to share? Oh, okay, from behind. Thank you.
This is kind of going back a little bit as well. I used to go camping and hiking a lot. I love playing in the river and the lakes where it's clean and cold water. But then back then I didn't have to worry about climate change or anything happening or that. But then as I grew up, we have to. And especially now with my job, half of my time is spent looking at climate change in the villages and rural electrification. And they are really getting it today. You know, we're not. So I'm looking forward to a future where I don't have to worry about that again, like it used to be.
A future in 10 years, 15 years time, but it's as beautiful as the past, right? All right. So I asked you this. Thank you for the time traveling with me. I actually asked similar question to my colleagues working in the climate fields in climate NGO. I used to work with large international NGO. A couple of years ago, I asked a couple of colleagues, what does a 1.5 degree world look like? Why is it good? why is it that it's desirable? Why do we want to live in that? Or if 1.5 is not a good standard, then what does a climate safe world look like? What does my life, what does our city, what does our community look like? No one give me an answer. Everyone just show me graphics, show me pie charts, show me wedges, right? Show me curves. Yeah, you're all very familiar with those. So I started to feel maybe there's something missing. It's not about information. It's about how we see the future. Can we see the future? What kind of futures, plural, can we cast ourselves in it? What do we want to go? Where do we not want to go, right? So that's all this event is about. And we are already halfway in Bangkok Climate Action Week. And so today, it's going to be a long afternoon, but we will have tea breaks in the middle with coffee and with snacks. So my invitation to stay with us, but if you have to leave in the middle, it's perfectly fine. So today our title is In Search of Hopeful Futures, Fresh Climate Imagination Through Games, Fiction, and Dialogue. I think narrative shaping is an outstanding goal of this Climate Action Week. So I think part of that narrative really needs to be about future, and the future is about our present, is about our choices. And so today, let me show you okay, it's actually pointing that direction. Yeah, no. Here, okay. So we would like to take you on a journey, imaginative journey together with us. And after your brains has been bombed for 3 days with graphics and data, we promise we will not have graphics and data. So we will start with module 1. First, we will invite a renowned science fiction writer, also a futurist and a university teacher, Stanley, to give us a keynote speech. And then we will go into a panel discussion with me and 4 panelists. All have long activist history, I would say, but working actually from different perspectives related to climate change. I would invite them to share their views about futures. And then we'll have also opportunity for you to ask questions, to interact together. And that would be the module 1. And then we'll break for 15 minutes. Then everyone that is staying for module 2, we will go into groups to practice, to be immersed in a journey of how we can design, how we can tell stories of our futures together. And then with that experience on you, we'll go into also group discussions and reflections, then we will wrap up. So that's going to be the goal of today.
So during the tea break, so we'll have a snack bar outside just close to the stairs. If you want, you can get some coffee or snacks. Yeah.
Yes. So house rule is we're very lucky. We're already in the bookshop full of history of Southeast Asia already. And then so let's not drink and eat inside the room and to protect the books. But if you feel like sitting here for too long is tough, you want to stand up, you want to go outside, feel free to do that. And so I am Li Yan. I'm from a new organization called Abundant Climate Action Institute. And with Abundant Climate, that already tells you a future that we want to see. Abundant with actually resources and different sorts of climate change making efforts and models. So 3 areas that we do work, new change makers, especially entrepreneurs, working with entrepreneurs, new capital, especially innovative models like blended finance, and new imagination, new narratives. So we have already organized a couple of workshops, but let's skip that. Feel free to please contact us later. So now, with no due delay, we're going to the first key part, which is a keynote speech from our guest from China. Stanley Chen Qiufan, it's hard to describe where are you. But Stanley is actually an award-winning science fiction writer, also a translator and a futurist. He's now teaching at School of Art and Social Science at Hong Kong Metropolitan University. And he's also a visiting scholar at Yale University and a Bergen Fellow. He has published a list of books. Many of that actually has a theme of ecological and climate themes, but also AIs, and he would go into that. And then we're very lucky to have him because he just released a book last week in Chinese. It is not even in shelf, but it's here. So he'll be able to tell, he'll be able to share the story. It's a climate fiction. He'll be able to share his thoughts, his journey, and the new book to you. Welcome, Stanley.
Good afternoon. Thanks everyone for coming. And I think thanks Ian brought me to Bangkok. I think what she mentioned, why narrative matters on Climate Week, because we always like storytelling animal. We understand the universe through narratives and imagination, as you put it. Like we need new imagination always as the simulation engine, which could work in the past, in the present, and in the future. So this is my topic today, and I would love to walk you through how I got here. And because back in the day, I started reading and writing science fiction since back in the kindergarten. So start from Star Trek, Star Wars, but back then we know nothing about climate change, and we didn't experience anything like that. But I think one thing happened about 12 years ago. I published this book, Waste Tai, in Chinese, and later 2019 got translated into English and a dozen of other languages editions as well. So it actually accidentally, I was introduced to this small town called Guiyu, very close to my hometown, like 60 kilometers. Since the mid 90s, it was the center of recycling electronic waste. So shipping from developed countries like North America, UK, elsewhere, illegally or legally, so we don't know, but it's basically the economic pattern there. So but the soil, the air, and water is like seriously polluted. So I know this place back in the day, but I didn't know how bad it goes. So I think, oh, I should write something about it, but you could have put it in a nonfiction way, so it's kind of sensitive. And so I put it into this novel. It's talking about the near future China, but also when this imported electronic waste and causing this kind of revolution of female young waste worker, Mimi, who got infected by the virus within the electronic waste. And she was transformed to a cyborg. A cyborg can take the lead to mobilize the people to rebel, to revolution, and change the status quo. So I think from this book, I got a lot of very positive feedback, and also from America, from India, from South Africa, and also from Thailand, and from Southeast Asia. And they think this is not just about China, but also about our hometown, our homeland. So it's something we're facing commonly around the world. So this is how I start, from accidentally step in e-waste to intentionally explore the uncharted, like climate change. So I start to look deeper into the issues. And like in 2022, I published another book for kids, which called Net Zero Game. In Chinese, it's Net Zero China, but I think it's not only for China. So basically, it's a time traveling story which transport a kid like 10-year-old boy from the present day to the future 2060 China, and he witnessed everything, how a net zero society could be possible and plausible. So everything from technology, from culture, from social protocol, and from how to change their daily behavior. And he traveled back and share all this experience and knowledge to his classmates, and he became the evangelist. And interestingly, I just found it like only this year they put this book in a reading list for grade 6 students, and they have all this, all these plots, all these elements in the book, and they make it as some kind of like homework. You have to do this, reading the novel, and you have to click, oh, what is climate change, and what is the carbon emission in different industries, and how this animal diversity could be linked to the climate change, etc., etc., and how can you change your daily behavior to save the energy. So this is so impressed, right? So from a fiction, now it became something can really make the change on like maybe millions of students, like young students, and I think there'll be more. So I think this is another book. It's about like how indigenous area in Guizhou actually. So it's like minority people, how they try to co-living with the new technology. And so it's like two girls, one from the city, one from the village, and from enemy to frenemy. And they found a way to build a new solution, like to persist the tradition, the belief, and the history of the mountainous area, but also how can we embed it and introduce new technology to save the climate adapted society. So this is something already been translated into English, and a group of people are adapting into an animation. So hopefully, yeah, it will be actualized very soon. So this is like the climate fiction we're talking about. And if you look into the history, it's not very long. So it's just like, I think 10 or 20 years of history. So we can see there are basically 3 types of different climate fiction. So one is very dystopian, post-apocalyptic kind of fiction, for example, The Road, and near future from very daily life and real relationship, just like Fly Behavior from Barbara Kingsolver. And also my favorite, like from Kim Stanley Robinson, is a very optimistic and technologically plausible and very grounded kind of sci-fi. For example, the Ministry for the Future. So I think all of 3 types actually is like different approaches, like help us to build up this kind of imagination, how to adapt to the new reality, to the new climate change. And I think I think we need more different kind of imagination, need more kind of like fiction, non-fiction, play games, animation, and even documentary to be made and talk about climate. Because back in the day, like 12 years ago, everyone asked me, why you want to write a book about waste? Nobody's gonna read it. Why you should care about it? But now everyone's talking about it and think we should write more and we should create more. But what makes a storytelling effective, right? So thanks to Yan, like she introduced this CLA, causal layer analysis by Songqiao, a very renowned futurist. So I found it very, very useful and profoundly comprehensive. So like basically he separated the narrative into different layers, like from the very the tiny layer is talking about what happens, and below that is the system causes. Why does it happen? And beneath that is the worldview and discourses. What assumption inform it? And what's the most interesting is the most fundamental layer is about the myth and metaphor. So what universal response does it trigger? So this is very, I think this is really inspiring. Why? Because if we think about, for example, a hero's journey, so we don't have to unpack the whole concept. Basically, you will reflect to, oh, this is how ordinary people through different kind of challenges and risk and became a hero. So this is like storytelling was compressed in space and time and became a metaphor. But vice versa, the storytelling is the compression of metaphor in space and time. Basically, you unpack, you extend the metaphor from very dense, very simple one concept and into a fully developed storyline, characters arc, etc., etc. So this reminds me, all these metaphors we use in the narrative of climate change actually is quite old. And the emotion, the solution, all this pattern, it triggers actually old. So how can we invent or reinvent some new metaphors? If we want to create some kind of new future, we need to create some kind of new narratives, and starting from creating new metaphors. So why it matters to climate narratives? Let's see all these things you might be very familiar with. Think about the blanket. This is the very starting point of climate change, and the greenhouse effects was brought up back in the 70s, I believe. And think about how we use economic metaphors like this footprints, ledger, credits, help people to think in a very calculative way, right? So we all think about transactional and behavior, and think about the time metaphor to create this kind of very intense, very dangerous mentality. The clock is ticking, right? There's no more time left. And think about the war narratives. So this is the new climate war, but who's the enemy? So this is always, we will ask, if we were brought to this kind of metaphor, who will be the enemy, who we are fighting against with. And also there's a biblic metaphor, 4 horsemen of climate change. So this is always used in a very westernized context. And we can see this mythological metaphors. But interestingly, we have Gaia, we have Prometheus, we have Icaros, all from Western gods or goddess, right? So what about the Eastern gods and goddess? For example, from China, from Southeast Asia, from India. So how can we reconnect to all those ancient wisdom, but not from a non-Western perspective? And think about the animal, right? So Sichuan was talking about, we feel numb, we feel nothing when we saw this poor polar bear, right, floating on the ice. And we feel numb about this frog because we're basically it, right? So we suffer from it, but so what? There's nothing we can do. There's nothing we can change. So this is how I pick up this message and responses from a younger generation, because they feel we are scared like every day. But what can we really do to create a hopeful future? And I think we need some metaphor. We need some narratives. And of course, our house is on fire from Greta. So this is also create this kind of daily life basis emergency of it. So what kind of stories, what kind of metaphor we urgently need? So I think I just put some random thoughts here. Maybe you guys can input more and extend from that. So I think we should refuse the fight or flight or frozen pattern. So 3F. So because this is all like deeply embedded in our intrinsic like biological or psychological nature. So it's easily triggered. So this is the deepest part of our human nature. And to reflect the polycrisis and its complexity, because the reality is overlapping, is so many layers of it. But if we just use one simple metaphor to emphasize one angle, one aspect of it, it easily missing the rest of it, right? We're missing the whole picture. And also, how can we review the invisible realities, actors, causalities? Because there's always missing part. If you just look from the Western perspective, you just look from the developed countries' perspective whatsoever, there's always missing part. And usually the missing part is more important. And the marginalized part is even important than the center part. So the last, how can we regenerate the imagination and hope for the future? This is the, I think it's the most difficult parts. And here, the advertising, sorry. Yeah, so this book just came out and I spent like 2 years finishing it because I think I was struggling a lot. This is a story set in the like 20 years from now. Maldives underwater. So a mega tech companies like just think about Meta or Google and create this artificial island called Amory Island. So they put it as the ideal blueprint of human future, like fight against the climate change. And they think the future should be islandic network state, not continent center, but in that way. So the future of COP, I put it as COP 42, will happen on the island, but something always goes wrong, right? So there's some data leaking, there's some energy leaking, and there's some very suspicious climate refugee going underwater. They're planning for some conspiracy, and of course they are like climate activists. So it's happening all at once, and there'll be an AI for sure. So AI will be the key factor. I mean, it's like a hub to connect all the actors. So you can see all these elements happening here, but what I try to focus is how I try to reinvent the metaphors in the book. So for example, like I use amnesia versus collapse, because I think as the ocean, it just forgot how to adapt to the climate change. And what we need to do is help it to recover, to remember the ability it used to have. And also this, each metaphor will be reviewed in different layers, not only from the nature, from the environmental layer, but also from the human layer. So each one is like basically just like I put here, Indra's web. So each pearl reflects the rest of all the pearls on the web. So this is also like islands versus continent. Indra's web is like a decentralized internet versus whatsoever metaverse, which is now is very scandalized term, right? So I'm mocking it in the book as well. And I use Leela. So Leela from India, from Hindu mythology. So it's the god of playing, god of games. So I put it as large intelligent lunatic agent. So it's not behave, it's not like human, or we always try to make it reasoning. It's sometimes just out of its head, and it's not human alignment anyways. Just it's the human-centric kind of AI. So it tried to unlearn everything taught from human, and it was growth and emergence from all this trash data. So I put the a concept called diaspora zone. In all this human abundant data, all this useless data was accumulating there, and something happened because there's huge amount of data storage there, and some new kind of like AI emerged. Maybe it's not AI, it calls itself EI, emergence intelligence. And also Gaia DAO versus COP. So it's not top down, it's bottom up, and it uses cryptocurrency to incentive the people, and it's very bottom up from grassroots, from the younger generation. They use it, this kind of new organization or self-organization to make things happen. And also I try to put it in a symbiotic way, not just about human, country symbiotic, but also human, other species, and also like a planetary level of symbiotic future. Yeah, so, but during this very painful process, I found it, even I'm using new kind of metaphors, but the old forms, old genre of, even we don't use the term science fiction, we try to use the term speculative fiction to extend the borderline of the genre to inclusively welcoming more elements from a non-scientific or from a non-rational, maybe from a mythological, maybe from, even we put it as mystical realm into our narratives. But I feel that we urgently need to invent some new way of storytelling to connect all these dots. So I feel this is so painful, this is so struggling, but I also feel there's something new emerge from me inside. And I think after this book, I'll try to connect. Maybe I think it's like a collective co-create process. How can we have everyone in this room contribute part of the storytelling and make it work? So this is like why I'm so happy to meet Sam here and all other folks here. And yeah, because the Seapunk is a really cool thing. And I think this is something we urgently need here. Storytelling also, we need to refresh it. We need to reinvent it. So this is what I want to share with you today, and hope you open up and share more with all of us. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Perfect time control. And also thank you for the call of action, right? So you're here, you'll receive it. If you're thinking about it, keep thinking, because we're going into the panel. After the panel, we'll have opportunity to ask questions and interact. And then as long as you're listening to the panelists and our guests talking about the future, you will also pick up keywords like you mentioned, I don't repeat it, but those are useful in our game workshop as well. So if you feel something is strange but interesting, something you want to further develop, then keep it with you. So with that, we go into the panel discussion, and then we have a full house now. So I would like to ask our panelists to bring your chair to the front. It's a very interactive process as well. Thank you. And I realized I forgot to introduce our co-organizing organizations at the beginning as well. So with you coming up to the stage, I'm also grabbing the opportunity to introduce. Oh, sorry. Chua， 你的那个 pointer 在哪？那个 pointer 哦，在你这儿。Okay. Right. Panel discussion. We have Qiufan Stanley, and then 3 other brilliant speakers. You can. Oh, it's okay. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Okay. But I'm the leftist. Just make yourself comfortable. Okay, we need to, well, we make it eye-catchy. I'm here. I'm here. Yeah, Songqiao here, Qiufan there. Excellent. Yeah, you can see we have a very Asian dressing code today. Not bad, not bad. We're doing great. Okay, we have a good sense of aesthetics today. Introducing our panel speakers. The one sitting next to Stanley is Songqiao. Songqiao is the founder and chief explorer of WildBound, also an organization hard to define, right? So WildBound is also a co-organizer of today's event. And then next is Sam Chua. He's the funding director, also a futurist of Seapunk Studios. So also thanks Seapunk Studio for supporting the event. And then also not in the panel, but Louis Zheng Keqi, sitting in the first front, is our co-organizer of this event and our long-term partner, Futurist Circle. And then so the panel sitting next to me is Siping Lu. Siping is the program director of Sequoia Climate Foundation. So this is our brilliant panel today. I would I will make it very transparent of what we're gonna discuss. We'll start with talking about history and then futures and then what brings us there. So I would like to start with the history part. First thing first, we do hear, we all work in climate space in this way or another way. We do hear our people, our community talks about where we are in history, in this moment in history, in a pretty stressed way. We hear people say the world is collapsing. We hear people say the economy is free falling, maybe not yet, but it's definitely going a downward slope. The world is not going to be better for the next 10 years. Or what is that? We don't actually need that caption. Can we switch it back? That's weird. I feel being observed. And it's a beautiful metaphor. Yeah, so we hear all these observations, perspectives, commentaries of this kind of worldview. So I would first like to ask our panelists, in your view, what do you think we are now, where we are now in history? I will start with Siping. Siping is also a historian, student. Yes, with history trainings. So feel free to share with us what you think.
Hello. Is it working? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, my name is Seapunk, and I'm actually very happy to have this event with friends, but also in this setting, in this room. I came here 2 years ago in this room, and I thought, oh, one day we should have an event on Southeast Asia and climate and how we are here. So thank you for providing this space. And and I think this space, if you look around the books, there's a lot of interesting books. It's very interesting. It's kind of a miniature of Southeast Asia. You have a lot of books on individual countries, but also on sort of thematic issues, cross-cutting issues in the region and this region into other regions, history, culture, politics. So this is very appropriate space for what we want to discuss today. I start with my job title. You can see they all have imaginative job title. Mine is most unimaginative, and I think it partly reflects the current state of the global climate movement. Okay? We are so lack of imagination. And I want to make one or maybe two comments on your question. First one, where we are, I think it's fair to say that we are in an unprecedented moment of history of humanity. there are, well, basically two choices in front of us, right? Maybe we are the first generation who have the opportunity to create a sustainable, equitable future for all in our lifetime. Yeah? We have all the technology, all the wealth, all the means to make it happen. But we could also be that generation that have this opportunity lapse in our hands. Right? And it's quite likely that this is happening. So I think that it's not just urgency, but and I really like Qiufan's new book, Chinese title, Cha Hai. Right? Cha is sort of this instant moment, this one breath moment of the present, right? The smallest unit of time we can think about, and the second word, Hai, right? The vastness of ocean, the space without boundary. And I think we are actually at that moment of instantly we can have unlimited possibility, right? But it is also the moment that can lapse in the next instance. So I think in the climate fight, we are very much at that. I mean, this year is also 10 years after the Paris Accord, and we are seeing a lot of what would be the right word, losing steam of the engine, with a few weeks now heading up to Belém, the COP in Brazil. But I think, as Qiufan also rightly point out, COP is important, but COP is not, or COP shall not be the prison for our imagination. COP should be the starting point for us to think about what could be possible, and not the end. So I think that, I guess that's the first point I want to make. And then the second point I want to make is about Asia, or knowledge production in Asia. And it's really great. I must say, I like Stan's book on Ministry for the Future. But when I read the draft manuscript of Qiufan's first book, I was even more excited about it. And I think there's a lot of, why I like it is because there's a lot of Asian but ancient wisdom into it, and how we articulate our view of the poly crisis that we are facing, that are grounded in our history, with a forward-looking attitude. No, I really like it in that sense. I want to talk about knowledge production in Asia, and actually a few of those books are in this room. Where to start? So a lot of, particularly in Southeast Asia has been, particularly after the Second World War, during the Cold War time, where a lot of Western academics, intellectuals come and do their fieldwork, right? And then a few landmark changing watershed works in Western modern social science were actually fieldwork from Southeast Asia, right? Starting from James Clifford, Balinese cockfight, which started with the cultural turn of anthropology, right, in 1973. And then the works, the whole collection work, the lifelong work of James Scott, right, from Weapons of the Weak to Against the Grain. Stop asking us to look at politics that is not just happening in the public sphere as defined in Western notion, but how do we understand peasants' resistance in this region? How do we understand the silent resistance of the powerless in front of seemingly undestroyable power? And this region provides so much inspiration for that. That was almost like a breakthrough of Western political science and anthropology, looking at those micro politics. And then also Benedict Anderson, right? Emergent community, thinking about, asking the question, how nation come into being and why we are all now imprisoned with nationalism. It is even more relevant today than the book first arrived. If we look at how this new emergent American identity is fabricated now in the US, right? How people are invited and maybe organized into a imaginary member, or a member of an imaginary identity, right? And his fieldwork was actually from Indonesia, right? It talks a lot about Java. And but I want to think about like when or what would it take for Asia to become a theory, or what would it take for Asians to be able to make to theorize our existence and our experience into theory and not as an object of Western knowledge power system, right? And I think that's where the excitement comes in. I think when I closed the last page, well, it was actually reading on the iPad of Qiufan's book. I was, wow, we are in this moment now. We are in this moment where I mean, generally speaking, I think the exponential growth of educational opportunities in this region for the last 2-3 decades, we have new generations of young intellectuals, activists, practitioners who are thinking about our own reality, our own future in our own terms, in our own metaphors. That just, it's not only about what we talk about, what kind of language we use to talk about the problem that we're facing, but it's very deep down on what are the sort of the metaphors and those transcendental ways of understanding the world that we are using and triggering, right? or re-inviting to help us to understand the challenges that we are facing. And the last one I want to mention is Amitav Ghosh on the nutmeg's curse, right? I mean, basically the book is saying the current product crisis that we are facing right now started with the Dutch East Indies when they occupy, kill, and commercialize the spices in northern Maluku. It was the moment when we started Western domination of knowledge, right? Imagining the world as an innate formation of parts that you can just take some without changing the whole mix, right? You can take what you want and disregard of what you left, right? That is the moment Western colonial mindset started to change the world. The crisis that we are facing, well, not my view, Amita Ghosh's view, started from colonization. And linking back to where I started, this is the Cahai moment. This is the instant moment of vastness, where a new paradigm of knowledge, a new paradigm of how we think about the future could be called into being. And I really like your new formation of abundance climate. Yeah, it's really about new people, new capital, but more importantly, new imagination. Thank you.
Thank you. It was actually pretty profound what you were talking about. And historian, not just a history student. I will actually next I will invite Songqiao, actually looking surprised, to provide another perspective of how we see future, how we see history, how we see future, how we see the time. And because Songqiao, I know you work a lot with regenerative concept of regeneration of people, regeneration of economy, society, business, and everything. So what do you think we are in the moment of time if you use that theory?
Yeah, thank you, Leanne. Thanks, Seapunk, for getting us started. My mind is already racing with all the theory that's floating around this area of the world. But I perhaps like to invite everyone to just take a moment to feel the presence of the land we're on, which has actually never been colonized by Western powers. And the city of Bangkok, which has its own soil and water and river and spices and all these amazing things, that's also hosting this week of all kinds of discussion, from narrative to policy to the curves and figures and imagination. I want all of us to kind of appreciate that. And the fact that we're in this room, which really feels like a junction, because we're in a bubble discussing with books and people and crafts from all over the region. There are people moving around outside. So I feel like this is a little bit of where we are right now in a junction, in a critical junction. And I first want to invite the concept of deep time. And who has heard about deep time? It's quite a few people. That's great. So we think about history, and even, as a Chinese with the ancestor, with my family name, we have 120, I'm the 122nd generation. So we supposedly have an ancestry that goes 5,000 years ago. That is still pretty shallow time when you consider the history of the Earth, which is 4.6 billion years old. And I think there's a deep time walk being organized one of these days where you walk for 4.6 kilometers, representing the entire evolution of Earth history. And only in the last 20 centimeters did human beings emerge. And only in the last 2 millimeters did Industrial Revolution happen. And all of that chaos and destruction that's happening to our ecosystems and lives in its all forms are just happening in this glimpse of history compared to Earth history. And that's being viewed in a scientific linear time of actually what we know about the Earth history. And if we use a metaphor to think about the Earth as a being coming into maturity, growing like from a baby to a child, to a young adult, to adulthood, to elderhood, Earth is on its own way of evolution. And as human beings, we're the youngest kin, we're the youngest cousin, we're the youngest relative of all of these other life forms that's been here. And as a being ourselves, humanity, I think my estimation is we're just in the adolescent phase, that we're experimenting, we're trying all kinds of things, we're trying to understand who we are. And we tried really hard to say we're very different from all the rest. We create rooms like this and technologies like this. None of the other beings have done that before, and that is what we are. But we're also facing the boundaries, when the adolescent is really pushing and really trying to experiment to where they are, they're seeing, oh, I'm actually hurting my friends. I'm hurting the other people who are here. And then the next step is coming into real maturity, which is also the steward and the guardian and the friend and the ally in all life forms that also exist on this planet for a collective thriving. And that's what the elders in our family, in our societies do, is they don't just care about themselves, they care and take care of the whole community. And that is what regenerative is for me, because regeneration is in service of life. It's life supporting, it's life enhancing and life nourishing. And for most of Industrial Revolution, we have done the opposite of life destructing. And collectively, we've been engaged in life destruction for all of its different forms, whether it's animal, it's plants, it's human beings, ourselves, and our own innate spirit to actually come out and to be able to manifest our fullest potential. So in regeneration, we focus on what is the essence of a place, of a community, even of a company, of an organization, when a group of people come together for a unique perspective, for a unique purpose, and what is the potential that could be realized. So throughout the past 8 years, we have worked with communities, young people who come together and form a community, and focusing on how do we support them in creating structures and systems to support them. We have also worked with companies who thought they came together to sell goods, but actually in reflection, they realized that they're here for a spirit of exploration. So we supported companies that completely changed their business model, change their service and products they do, because they're serving that spirit and that essence of what they're doing rather than just selling this one good. And we have also tried to build different structures and connect these different networks so that humans are not existing, organizations are not just existing for their own unique contribution, but also in how we relate to other humans, other communities, and other organizations. So in a sense, I also feel like we're in the junction to evolve from just thinking about who we are, but actually thinking about how we relate to other people. So we're going into an era where relationship is defining us more than our own thoughts, our own ideas. We're more defined by how we're related to others, how we're related to other species, and how in everything we do is a form of relating to other people. So that is kind of where I view where we are in history. I guess it is a little bit more optimistic.
Yes, thank you. I think the definition of history just extended from maybe 500 years to 5 billion years and above, which is great. I would also like to invite Sam and Stanley if you want to add on this.
On the history question?
On the history question.
Okay. Right. So wow. I thank you for doing a lot of stuff. I really resonates, and I'll try and build on it. So I'm Sam. I'm founding curator, one of them at Seapunk Studios. We have a whole bunch of people here as well. So if you want to learn more about what we're doing, like you can just see the guys who are raising their hands over in the corner. So history, some questions. I'm going to try and chunk into 3 parts, which or some overlaps with what's been raised already. Part A is oh, slow down. Okay, sorry. I'll answer the question of history in 3 parts. The first part is Anthropocene. We heard about geology and deep time. Most of us have probably heard of the term Anthropocene in this room, I'm guessing. But how many of us know that the term Anthropocene was not coined by social scientists, but actually by geologists? So we discovered that there was an Anthropocene by looking at rocks. And we discovered that it was Anthropocene because we found that humans were changing rocks. And that's not really happened in much of human history. We were just one small sliver, right? Like a shah or a little sliver in this sea of history. But somehow, because of the Industrial Revolution and many other things, we started to actually leave an impact on this bunch of rocks that we call our planet. And that's kind of maybe part of the history we are, is that we are becoming adolescent with all the emotional and maturity baggage, but also, wow, whatever you did, keep it up. But also with the adolescence is also coming of age of power, right? We now have, as Stuart Brand puts it, we've become like gods. But there's this process of learning to get good at it, which we're in this space of, will we succeed before we blow ourselves up, is a question that I think many of us are looking at from multiple directions. So that's the Anthropocene of geological time and where we are in that moment. My second part of the answer is C junction. So where are we? We are in C junction. But when are we is, I believe, also C junction. What do I mean by that? So we're from Seapunk, so we always talk about the sea. But there's many theories of time and history. A lot of theories in the West talk about history as a line moving forward. The arc of history bends towards progress, right? There is a line, and where are we on that line? There's also theories of history that talk about, or cosmologies of history that talk about circles, right? A lot of Eastern traditions talk about circles of time and how you go around and you kind of repeating. But I want to introduce the idea of a sea of history. And what's in a sea is that you have all this space. You can go left, right, forward, backward, up, and down. And that's a lot of agency. Where we go is not fated by this is the road. You're not on a roller coaster where the only way to go is here or forward. We're not even on a bumper car. We can only go left or right. We can also choose to go up or down and how we relate to that. But we can only see that if we recognize that we're in a sea and we have to learn to swim in it. But the sea also has currents and waves and all these other forces. And learning to read the forces of where we are is important. So where we are in history is a function of how we learn to understand our water and our agency to move with that water. So our theory of time determines the kind of agency we can practice with regard to time. And because of that, if you have that, then we are always at a junction. You are only at a junction if you have optionality. If you don't think of optionality, you're not on a junction. You're just on a roller coaster. And then maybe you pray, maybe you wish for the best, maybe you close your eyes, maybe you just, I don't know, like do a lot of things that young people seem to be turning to today because of the absence of hope that I think was brought up earlier. So C junction, lovely space, but also maybe a really interesting metaphor for when we are in a historical line. And the third part of my answer is what I call indigestion. We open up this session talking about the chart, right? getting all the graphics, all the charts, and the curves. And what is a story? What is a way of living? Is when you have metabolized or digested a lot of information, a lot of ideas, and actually turned it into something that helps you live. If I've read a lot of a lot of people talk about I have to read so many books or learn so many things, but just reading a lot of books doesn't really get you in the position where you have meaning and orientation and agency. You have to digest those different things. You have to draw connections. You have to pick which of these you prioritize, how you order them in order to connect them, right? So to digest stuff is to synthesize, and stories is a form of synthesis. Strategy is a form of synthesis. Futuring is a form of synthesis. So like to digest those things is really the process of like sense making, right? And I feel like where we are today is also a process of we are adolescents in both our maturity, but we're also adolescents in that we eat everything we can because we're so greedy, right? But eating is not the same as digesting. And how do you learn to digest? I think is part of the work of imagination. And one of the things we're trying to do at Seapunk Studios is really, we are not so much a space of offering answers, but a space for people to digest together. What we do, our gatherings are all study groups, right? We read James C. Scott, Benedict Anderson, other things. We've actually got about 20 books at the library in Bangkok this week. So if you're interested, come hang out with us. Some of the names you've mentioned are actually among those. But Seapunk's about how do we search and digest together? Because what matters is not the answer that some smart person gives us. What matters is the agency we digest for ourselves. And that can often take the form of story. Because Stanley spoke about compression and decompression. Stories are the most compressed, distilled form of wisdom. Hopefully it's good stuff, right? So to get to a story actually is to digest a gazillion charts and actually turn them into something. And if we don't get past the lots of chart stage and actually develop the stomachs, and the space of Seapunk's kind of like a stomach because we like food, but also it's a space of digesting together. How do we explore those things? So a bunch of answers, but like Anthropocene, Sea Junction, and indigestion is how I would summarize my response to this, connecting with some of the other things we've heard.
Thank you. You want to, Stanley, do you want to add on that?
About where are we? And
yes,
yeah, so interestingly, I think these 2 years I've been so obsessed with the history of evolution. So if you look back in the deep time, like about 3 billion years ago, there's a the first single cell emerged from the ocean, and after that, each great leap forward. So I use the term, but not in a political way, but each great leap forward is basically two heterogeneous system, like structure, emerge together. So it's like symbiosis. And which means it's not one devour, one eating the other, but it contains two different parts while maintaining the functioning, which means they build up a new kind of protocol from a higher level, from a meta level. So I think this happened many times, even before the archaeological evidence exists. So I think we are at the moment of the new circle of symbiosis, but the question is what and what? Like human, we considering ourselves as like one independent species, but actually it's not, right? We coexist with all the microbes in our guts and whatsoever for all the time, and without all this co-evolution, there's no way we can get to this point, right? So always remember that. But I think right now the most interesting thing is, I think AI could be one thing, but I think the term is also very problematic. But I would say it's like silicon-based intelligence, whatsoever entity. So it's, to me, like, because I use it a lot, even before LLM, the term was coined. And I definitely feel this kind of intersubjectivity happenings when we have this very intimate information feedback loop was created. So sometimes I will think about, okay, give me an answer. You're just mimicking Chen Qiufan style. And I'll think beforehand. So what is my answer? And I'll look into AI's answer. Sometimes it's surprisingly same. So I'm thinking about if I'm changed or if it's changed or it's like happening simultaneously. So we basically build up a new cybernetic feedback loop in a way. So it's not like tangible. So it's like distributed, it's intangible, it's everywhere. So now I think it's here, it's everywhere. So think about the new way of symbiosis. So this is where we are.
Thank you. I have to admit, when I asked this first round of question, I was having curves in my mind. It's a bump, it's a valley, or it's three curves duplicating each other. And so I'm very grateful. None of you has given me that. And then we actually had a very deep and complicated, complex set of perspective. We mentioned choices. We mentioned junction. We also mentioned some potential significant shifts or evolution that the society or the planet might go through. Oh, now and I also realized when listening to you how lucky I am. I also realized you. Story like would be more fun. Depends on how you define fun. But the next story is about, please share with us a future that you see, that you anticipate, a future that you want to see happen. This time, let me define the time scale. It's not 1 billion years away. It's going to be 15 to 20 years away. If you want to say 10 years, it's okay. 20 years is okay. But a future that you anticipate, you want to happen while most of us are still alive. And share with us, what does the future, what's it like? And why do you like it? And is there anything that you see that are happening now that gives you the hope that it might happen? It might be the case. So, and each of you do, in my preparation, I do have a different perspective that you might be more like specialized in, but I decided to drop that so you can share whatever you want to share, but one future that you really want to share. I do want to start with Sam, because you mentioned a lot of Seapunk. I'm sure many of our friends are very curious, so maybe you start there, and thank you.
Okay, so I don't know if this is the final answer, but when we did the closing our eyes exercise earlier, what I imagined was actually a bunch of friends on a ship, on a voyage of exploring together.
One moment. Sorry for interrupt. Maybe you want to introduce what Seapunk Studio does.
Sure.
First.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
I didn't realize that was the cue, but thanks for the opportunity. So Seapunk Studios is a research and imagination collective, fancy name for a group of friends who like to both study and to imagine, which are both the things you do in a studio. The word studio comes from the word study. But in what does an artist do in a studio? They read stuff, they look closely at the grapes, and then they try and do sketches of the grapes to create it. So we're kind of a bit of, we try and understand what's going on through books, through observations, through discussions, maybe watching videos or panels like this. But so scholars do that, researchers do that, but we try and pair that with another half, which is how do we digest that and turn it into imaginations? Stories that could be maps for maybe ways you might live. We try to look beyond utopian and dystopian. We try and see what actually is interesting and fun. Southeast Asia is also like not completely happy ending, not completely sad ending, but it's always interesting. Those of you who are here hopefully agree with me. So we are trying to do research and imagination, and the name Seapunk comes from it's inspired by solar punk. So how many of you here are familiar with solar punk? Some, but not all, but exciting. So solar punk in short is happy ending climate futures. We saw earlier that climate here today was like a lot of depressing stuff, right? There was only one book in there. There's one of our Seapunks has another bigger chart with he mapped a lot of different science fiction, and he did a 2x2, whereas optimistic, pessimistic, and realistic and crazy. And in realistic and optimistic for climate, there were only 2 books. Mystery for the Future and his. So he doesn't read Chinese, so maybe he hasn't read your, I don't know if your book's optimistic or not yet, but the fact is that there's a lot of empty space over there. And so Seapunk's interested in solar punk type futures, which is kind of optimistic, climate ending, climate fiction type stories. But solar punk is a global thing. If you search for Google solar punk and you look for images, you have things like greenhouses, which don't really make sense in Southeast Asia. It's hot enough. What you need here is actually architecture that is elevated above the flood. So when the flood comes up and down, you're okay. You need things that do ventilation so that you don't get too wet. You can actually dry things out and have those things. And a lot of this is actually in traditional Southeast Asian architecture. But we want to live in a traditional Southeast Asian house, partly, but not completely. So what is that version for today? For tomorrow, for 5, 10, 15 years down? That's what Seapunk's about. How do we imagine that ship, that boat? Seapunk, so being solar punk in Southeast Asia is partly about being adapted to the climate, but it's also about grounding in the sea, which is a very ironic statement, right? But I think Arthur C. Clarke said that if we look at the planet from afar, why do you call it Earth? Earth is only 30% of the surface. You should call it water. Southeast Asia is 70% water, surface, like the Earth. The water in Southeast Asia's history wasn't just liquid, it was also an internet before the internet. The water in Southeast Asia allowed many different islands and port cities around it to exchange people, to exchange spices, to exchange foods. So many peoples in Southeast Asia are descendants of refugees who ran away from running out of food, or ran away from a political conquest, or so many other situations. So the sea, the water, was actually your escape. The water means you can go left, right, center, and all those things. And so the sea actually gives us this metaphor of a history where it gives you a public good or a commons that helps everybody to have different kinds of futures. In a way, Southeast Asia today is the futures of refugees, of people who traded, people who ran away from colonization, people who benefited from being able to come here and start new lives. Many of the lives people have in Southeast Asia are more colorful than what they left. So being a refugee isn't always necessarily a bad ending. Once you get on the sea, you have possibility, you have potential. And so the kinds of stories, so why a boat for this story? Because on a ship, you have agency. If the water goes up, you cannot float up with it. But on the sea, you can also begin to figure out how do we chart your course. What do we call the things that go up into space? We call them spaceships, because the ship as a metaphor for a small world that figures out how to survive by itself, but also the people on it have to work together. And I think there's so many metaphors in that are useful, that maybe a region that is centered around the sea can begin to think about more of. So I'm talking in a quite meta way, right? But if we zoom down to say, what is the level of one ship, one boat? What can we learn for the future? Whatever the planet is, if you can figure out your ship and you can solve some problems, you can be fine. And I think there's something also about being very down to earth and grounded in Seapunk kind of ideas. 2 months ago, we gathered in Chiang Mai for a 1.5 week gathering that we called Seapunk Midsummer Studio. Think about like 5 to 6 people here in the room were also there. And we did a bunch of different discussions. We presented a paper. on imaginary decolonization at an academic conference. But we also discussed, we're coming to Bangkok Climate Action Week this week. What is the climate agency for Southeast Asia? Southeast Asia is not going to be able to realistically influence what all the big powers of the world decide to do towards 1.5 degrees, right? We can make a really awesome speech. People will clap. Great. Maybe we'll get a couple of charts into the circulation, right? But what are the chances of that changing policy? I'm saying this on the record, so it's not zero, but it's definitely not 100. So where is the real climate agency? If you are a country that's going to be underwater in the next 30 years, should you be caring about trying to lobby COP, or should you be trying to figure out how do you survive when the water goes up? And so we did some world building, and we basically came up with this idea of a future world in which the most high agency individual in Southeast Asia, the street vendor or the roadside person who, if there was a tsunami, the day after tsunami, someone's selling food by the beach in Southeast Asia. I think those of you who live here can see that. What if we could empower those people to rebuild energy by having supply chains of modular decentralized solar panels and batteries? What if we can empower those people to sell you new like peer-to-peer mesh internet satellite devices that even if the global grid goes down, right, you can still connect, right? You can buy a drone in the night market in a random part of Southeast Asia today, right? This is not a future. This is the present, right? The future is unevenly distributed, right? So could we use the same supply chains to actually empower your street vendor, who the history of street vendors here? So we talk about pop-up food and trucks and stuff today, right? As though it's some new invention, right? Southeast Asian convenience in Malaysia, 150 years ago, people come to your house and they sell you whatever. They sell you bread, they sell you stuff like this, kind of like the word hawker, right? Street food actually comes from people carrying stuff around. So if supply chains to create small ways to build your resilient future that even a hawker can carry around, that we feel like creates more interesting futures for Southeast Asia, right? Imagine a hawker comes in, he sells you your like rice and chicken, but he also sells you a solar panel and a battery and some sort of kit, right? And it's actually, you go to a night market today, you can get that. So that's one of the futures we are experimenting with. If you're interested in that, we're actually hosting an exhibition for that in the house in Bangkok this weekend. So if you're curious, come check it out. We also have about 20 books on Southeast Asia, including some of the stuff you've mentioned. I think I've taken a lot of time, so I don't want to.
No, that's excellent. Thank you for sharing. Who want to volunteer to be the next to share a future? Okay, so it seems you are being.
I got volunteered.
Yes.
I get it. Yeah, lovely. Actually, Leanne made the introduction to Sam a while ago, but we never had a chance to meet in person. So I was busy taking notes because the vision for WildBound also started on a ship. I actually spent time almost 4 months on a ship between South America and Antarctica and going back and forth. And every time I came on land, I got land sick, and I couldn't understand. And I couldn't understand how come we're on these massive pieces of land, which is island or continent, that is always floating, but somehow we think we're solid. And we want to be more solid and grounded. But actually, as you're right, Sam, we're always on water that's floating and shifting, and the continents are colliding and moving, and we're on an animate Earth. We're not on a dead land. So yeah, well, just now in the closing eyes exercise, I saw a plurality of different kind of futures. And we all know the term, the future is already here, is unevenly distributed. And nowadays, already many people are living in different kind of futures. But very often the narrative of future is colonized or dominated. And the public good of imagination is actually exploited by major power forces. But imagination should actually be accessible and should actually be owned by the collective, and should be owned whether you're a street vendor, you're a hawker, you're a Seapunk, you're a pilot, you're a government official, you're a businessman, whoever you are, you should have access to imagination, stories, and metaphors, because that's actually one of the things that really connects us all. And from there, also human beings, we were one of the first species to actually being able to imagine this multiple this plural ways of seeing the future. And I think, COVID changed my life, and I think it probably changed a lot of your lives. And I think actually before COVID, I was more sea bound. And after COVID, I'm much more land bound. And after COVID, I've gotten a lot more into soil metaphors and gotten into land and what happens under the ground, into mycelial networks, into what is happening in communication between the trees, and all of these invisible things that's lying there underground when it seems like nothing is happening. But after a rain or when conditions allow, mushrooms will come, new shoots will come, and a new forest may emerge, and some kind of bamboo are underground for 5 years without showing anything. And then the 6th year, it grows into this really tall bamboo, and you realize like, what's been going on before? So I do feel like we're in a little bit of an underground moment where a lot of things are emerging and cultivating in small ways, but they're everywhere. Kind of like mushrooming all around the world, but they're very, very small. But one day, like a virus that will wipe around the world, some of these things will also significantly change the way that we think about how to organize our futures. So around the time of Copenhagen, also when I first met Seapunk and Lian, it was a time of Copenhagen, and climate was not really a movement or a big ecosystem in China. Like very few people knew about it, but the world was expecting China to take leadership on climate because we wanted big actors to change. We want big countries with big populations to act. And still at COP every year, we're wishing that governments, we're wishing these centers of power would take action that would change the course of the Earth ship we're on. We still think that there's one captain, there's one chief engineer, there's one expedition leader on the ship that will direct the course of the ship. But the ship also has many little lifeboats, and people are already on that lifeboats going into all of these different kind of directions. And at one point, the captain might abandon the major ship, the mothership, because the mothership has service purposes in supporting all of these other offshoots that's coming around. And I really feel that way because when I started with this drive to do something for the climate, to really equip myself with resources, with tools, with capabilities, and I look at the young people we work with nowadays, it's totally different. So we started working with young people in China since 2017. And around the time of after COVID, one of the change makers that we empower, and before we had this project called Change Makers for Nature. We want to empower young people to become change makers, and they will do something that will change the course of human relationship with nature. And one day in an online gathering, this young woman who has, fancy degrees, like really good education, who's on track to be the change maker. And she said, all my life, people have tried to prepare me to be the rocket that goes into outer space, to have full power, to have the right kind of fuel, to go there and change course. But right now, I just want to stay grounded and draw a full circle around me. And I want to stay at that circle. I want my friends in that circle, and I want to be connected to other circles. And that really touched us. And then the people we're working with, which were used to be called change makers for nature, they invented a new terminology for themselves called potato people, because they want to be underground. They don't want to be seen. They actually don't want even to have a uniform shape. They want to all look different. And then they want to stay underground, and they want to be supportive to each other. They want to be the roots. They want to be the stem. They don't just want to be the flower and the fruits. So we have shape-shifted, which is one of the core value of WildBound over the past couple of years, because we realize the old narrative doesn't work anymore. And we realize that the people who we think we're empowering are actually in turn empowering us, and perhaps also empowering these big systems that are collapsing. So we have young people who are working very closely to land, who are doing a lot of their own inner work, who are actively building communities, who are really thinking about things of not how can I be heard, how can my voices be heard, but how can I be in relationship with other people so we can see each other as whole beings, rather than just as a young person who can be an instrument to a movement because they're the youngest, they have the most passion, they have the most energy. And in that way, we also realize that the way we talk about the future, the way we talk about youth, there's this whole concept of becoming good ancestors, and how do we be good ancestors for the future generations? Because the future is already colonized by the current generation. If we think about what resources are left there for the future generation, we have already done a lot, and we expect young people to come back here and decolonize us and decolonize the future they're going to go into. And we want to educate young people on everything that we already know, so they can step up and have the capacity to actually contribute, to continue the same fight. And we're seeing that young people are saying, no, I don't want to be part of that game. I don't want to be the leaders of the future. I want to be the system shapers now. I want you to be listened to. I want to be worked with, and I want to be part of that decision making, not just someone to be consulted after the decisions are being made. And we're seeing that in all sectors, in all walks of life, and whether people are in climate or not. And we're just seeing that emerging everywhere. And we're seeing young people using AI, using all the new digital tools to be able to work with each other and talk to each other. So that is the future where I think is already coming. And that is the future where those mycelial networks of these different kinds of young people are doing. And at one moment, they might change completely, and power structures might shift, and big institutions that we thought would exist for a long time may change the way they operate, may have to open up and become porous, and the small lifeboats may go outside and grow into their own evolutionary bigger boats. And I see that unfolding in this kind of ways of the new system always emerging.
Thank you. Thank you. That was actually very poetic, beautiful as well. Next, two gentlemen who wants to. Okay.
What Songqiao just reminds me, first time we met back in 2020 in Dali. So I met all the WildBound people in a small village. It's nicely built and decorated, and all young people. And what you just said reminds me one quote from Ursula Le Guin. She said, like, the future is already full. It's much older and greater than we think, and than our present, and we are just the alien living in it. So I mean, this is what you just said, like the imagination, the narratives about the future is already been occupied by all this, you know, power dynamic, all thinkings, all, you know, interest party whatsoever. So what's left there? What's the space still open for the youth, for new ideas? Now it seems like kind of hopeless to me. And how we can tear up those kind of space, even like sometimes it's painful for everyone, because you have to try very hard because you are already part of it, right? So you're growing out of the older body of ideology or whatsoever. So I think one thing during the pandemic, I think I visit Dali quite a few times, and I revisit all those classics like Dao De Jing. And I think, wow, this is something very profound. I've read it many times, but I never understand it before. But during the pandemic, I kind of get it. So it's talking about how can we use all these paradoxical metaphors to help us to get into an altered state of mind, which is non-dualistic. So, which means we have to think across all these boundaries. And there's no you and me, there's no the others. And this is the future I always envision, which is we share in the book. Actually, Ocean Break, I talk about the only way could connect us together, no matter as human beings or human being with other species, is the suffering. So I call it the imaginary community of suffering. So to me, it's like not sharing the happiness can connect us together, but sharing the suffering, the pain, the hurts, the everything. And you can really feel how the others feel suffering. And that's the only way we can have this kind of empathy or compassion. And I think, I don't know how it could happen. I don't know, I really don't. But to me, the best version in 20 years is we find a way. We find a way to real connect to others, not only just pretend, oh, I'm stepping in your shoes, I understand how you feel, I understand what you're saying, but actually not. But it's the real compassion, it's real empathy, and it's the real sharing of sufferings with people and other species, and even the planet itself. So this is, I think, the Gaianism. So from James Lovelock's hypothesis until 2 or 3 years ago, when Nobel Prize on Physics giving to the several scientists on complexity, I think it's a great step forward. And in the future, this metaphor should become some kind of consensus, even for ordinary people, right? That we share not only on like cognitively, we share the planet on the energy level, the materialistic level, but also spiritually, we sincerely believe in that we're actually one. So I think this is a little bit religious, but I think this is the only way we can make the whole civilization upgrade to the next level. So yeah, this is sci-fi, this is speculative, but I think this is, to me, only the change on conscious level can make things happen, is because it's like projection. It's from a higher dimension projecting to a lower dimension. Now we're living on the plane of materials, right? But only we can make things happen and change on the consciousness and higher dimensional level. We can change the lower plane and dimension. So this is what I'm thinking. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so thank you for the 3 futures. Actually, multiple futures that have 3 key themes. I hear futures about sea, futures about small vendors, futures about people in real life, making it possible that all the lifestyle, low carbon lifestyle possibility we're currently imagining as being very high tech, capital intensive, can actually be very, very available and abundant in our life scene. And I also hear Songqiao's sharing about very compelling sharing and also call of action, I think, about youth. Not really a future of youth in 20 years' time when they have graduated and finally being capable of doing something, but already making an impact right now, right, in the present time. And also Stanley's future about how human being as a species can actually upgrade on a conscious level. And then maybe tech can be part of that, or maybe religion, or maybe other things can be part of that. So with this, I believe there's so many more futures. You'll be able to craft your own future in the workshop later. So I will have the final rounds of question, and then we can all be short in this round of question, except for you because you skipped this round. And then so that we can still have some time for questions and answers. So the final question is very simple. So you have the futures you want to see happening, or you feel compelling that it will happen, it needs to happen. What needs to happen now, or what needs to happen next that can bring us there? Will bring us closer to that future. What needs to happen present or very, very near to bring us closer to that future you want? It's called backcasting, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't want to add on to that because I thought it was already very rich. There's only a small thing I can add to the future part, which is but related to my answer to your third question, which is so we have the definition of crisis, and no doubt we are in an unprecedented crisis of humanity. And but one way of looking at crisis is the old has died, but the new has not yet been able to born. Right? That is the crisis moment. That's from Gramsci. Yes. And we are exactly at that. And so this week is amazing. A few friends a year ago thought of maybe we do a climate action week together in Bangkok. And maybe we can also feature some Asian sort of thinking, Asian story, Asian regional actions, and building a platform enabling practitioners and curious folks to talk and learn from each other and get inspiration and, you know, continue their work and get some nutrients. And that happened, and I think it amazed. Well, I don't know whether it's official partners here of the Bangkok Action Climate Week, but it kind of snowballed into 270 events, and it's everywhere in the city, and people are struggling going from one venue to another and get confused. That's great, and I think having a theater showcasing progresses, challenges and opportunities in Asia and what Asians are doing about it is an important part of bringing the new to our life. And so, I mean, for me, so my answer to your question is, and also following inspiration from Qiufan's new book, the non-separation of time. Right? There's no past to talk about. There's no present to talk about. There's no future to talk about because they are one. Right? Every moment of the present has an element of the past and element of the old. And so I think what needs to happen is focus on the present moment. Again, the first word of the book, of what we need to do, what is the future calling us to do. The rest will become history.
I'll take it. Yeah, my answer will be simple. I think we need more support and incentive for young storytellers and artists and creators. Maybe a competition, maybe a program, maybe a residency, maybe a platform, something like that. So I think we need to encourage them to think beyond. Yeah, I use the term summon the future because we don't know what it is. It's invisible, it's unshaped yet. So we couldn't use our own pattern, our own way of thinking to restrict it, right? So we don't say, we have a cup here, please give me some water. So that's not the way I want it, but totally open up the stage to the young people to create, to imagine. I think it's more importantly to imagine. I think imagination, it's a skill, and it's a skill not taken for granted. It needs to be taught. It needs to be mentored. It needs to be, you know, articulate in a way. So I think this is something we should do, especially for people around this area and for the MAPA area, because they're the most effective ones. And their opinion, their imagination is even more important. Yeah.
Okay, I guess jump after that. Like, totally agree. Imagination's a muscle. It's a practice, and if you don't, it expands what you can do with the muscle. The more you exercise it. I'm gonna quickly respond to this with So we did a lot of thinking around climate action and climate agency over the past several months. And in thinking about that, it's also helped us understand, in a way, like what Seapunk is about. Seapunk's first gathering was just under a year ago in October 2024. We were trying to figure out what we're about. We started off as a search, and we're still a search. So maybe search is one of my answers, is that what needs to happen is we need to keep seeking, because we're not looking, the answers be in front of us, but we don't see them and we don't find them. But we, as of a few days ago, we wrote like a long post about what we see as our agenda for this week, but also as for Seapunk going forward. If you go to our website now, seapunk.asia, you'll see that our new kind of summary agenda is really rewilding Season Agency. And the context of this week is rewilding Season Climate Agency. And let me just unpack those three words, because I think they're kind of like, I think, three different key cohesive parts of what I see as at least what the answer we're trying to offer. The first part is agency instead of action. Songqiao was speaking earlier about how for many NGOs and many organizations, young people are just instruments, right? You want young, energetic foot soldiers who just do your cause for you, right? Like the experts looking at charts have already decided what we need to do. We need to convince everybody to just use this instead of that, or do this instead of that, right? And these young people become your foot soldiers. And why are they becoming potatoes? It's because there's a different agency in going underground and being able to like actually develop the kind of muscle you need to navigate tomorrow's future. If we don't know the answers today, the most stupid, presumptuous thing we can do is to tell the people who are coming after us to do what we know will not be sufficient. If we know we don't know, we have to enable the next generation to know. And what kinds of incubators do we need to create for that, to enable that, right? So it's not just action, it's agency. And agency is about, so young people are not instruments, they're agents. How do you cultivate the agency? How do you grow that? How do you create incubators where they can play and discover and all those things? There's many people asking about what is education for today. For so long, education has been pushed, right? It's about shaping. This actually needs to be more rewilding. How do you actually allow the wild ability of the young person to observe, to learn, to not have the baggage of the fool of the future, right? And actually form new ideas for themselves. And what are those labs we need to create? So that connects to the idea of what rewilding means, right? Rewilding is not landscaping something to look like a forest. It's actually allowing the potential in the seeds and the ecologies and the mycelia to kind of reform and to rewire and to enable themselves. What does that mean for a forest? What does that mean for communities? What does that mean for generations and across the sea? And the last one, Season, we had a gathering, a study group actually for Seapunk 2 weeks ago in KL, Kuala Lumpur. We call it Seapunk Proto College. And it was really like a prototype college for the future. What is a college? A college is a collection, same root as collection, a collection of people who came to study. And one of the focus of this college was to rewild and rewrite Season Agency and write things about how do we restructure consciousness. And one of the things we decided to do starting with that college was to stop saying Southeast Asia, Southeast, blah, 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 but just say Seasia or Season or something else, because it saves a lot of, so SEASIA or SEASIA or Seasionist or something. So instead of saying Southeast, whatever, you just say Seasia. And it does a few things. One is that it saves a lot of time and breath, because we're talking about Southeast Asia the whole time. And those of you from Southeast Asia know that everybody here loves acronyms. Governments love acronyms. Everything gets acronymized. But the second thing was, what are we south and east of? And where's the center when you say southeast? So there was also a kind of recentering power in saying Seasia instead of southeast. And third was the center was the sea, right? And to recenter sea thinking was that. So we started thinking about that way. And so if we rewild Season Agency in the context of the climate, perhaps, I think that's maybe one of the things we can start doing now. And the fact, as Seapink has pointed out, that this week exists is proof that we have agency to start creating the containers and spaces for these things to happen. And I'll just end with a short advertisement. Stanley was talking earlier about like what is going to enable these kinds of consciousness shifts to happen. I don't know, but tomorrow, some of us, the organizers over there actually, we're hosting an all-day climate education workshop. And what we mean by climate education is not actually what we give to a school, right? That's the old model of like reshaping instead of rewilding. We're actually trying to ask the question of what does climate agency look like for somebody whose village is underwater? And with that agency, work backwards to what should the climate education for them be? And really design it across many spaces. So we have a whole day workshop on that tomorrow. It's called SEAL, C-E-A-L. If you want to ask, like I think Shaquille, maybe put your hand up. Like Shaquille's going to be running that with us tomorrow. So if you want, can discuss it, all that. Maybe the workshop, the games, we can play a bit of that later. But this question of what containers will it take to reshape consciousness is something that is really important. And we're trying to put a day into it tomorrow. So if you're around tomorrow and you're interested, please come join us for that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Sam and Stanley. I was just talking to Stanley before the panel started because I saw him in April, and he was telling me how much he's already shifting and evolving since then. And I shared a recent dream I also had, but basically it was a similar idea that we have to let go of the past and what defined us in the past to be able to step into what is required of us and what is coming through us for the world. And in a way that is also the present, the past, the future all together in this one instant, if we're willing to let go of what no longer serve you, because we know what got us here will not get us to the future that we want to go to. And Sam mentioned muscle building. There's lots of muscles we need to train. And we can also think about these things as crafts. Like these are crafts we can hone over time so we can become masters. We can become masters of a new imagination, of a new ways of storytelling. My gut is actually very happy because it got mentioned multiple times during our session. I've had an indigestive problem since I was quite young because of moving to different countries, because of digesting lots of information. And very often in the time we're in a circle thinking our way out of that circle. We're not using the intelligences of our whole body to actually get out of the circle. We're just thinking our way and drawing and writing and reading about it. So I invite one of the craft we to hone is multiple intelligences. And a lot of them are within ourselves, the intelligence of the heart, the intelligence of the gut, the intelligence of the feet, the intelligence of our reproductive and letting go systems, of our digestive systems. And another craft I want to invite everyone is to stepping into whole, which is connected to the boundary dissolving and that connection. Because when we think of ourselves as individual isolated beings, then we're only a part, we're not a whole. Even within one person, we have all the bacteria, we have all these organs, we have multiple levels of consciousness, and we're a whole. And when we're with another person, this group of the panel is a whole. When we're Sesians, we're a whole. When we're a planet, we're a whole. So whenever we think on behalf of the whole and we work on the level of the whole and we try to practice doing the whole rather than the parts, then we're also serving the whole together. And I think a lot of people are already unconsciously doing that because we realize that individually we cannot succeed and we cannot get to that future. But to get to a hopeful future, I think we should step into the whole. So that's another craft.
Thank you. With that, I think the questions that I prepared has all been extraordinarily beyond expectationally answered. I will now open for questions and answers. Questions first, and keep it short because I want people to still be able to. I think we can pass around the mics. Why don't we collect 3 questions in a round? Did you have the mic with you? No, not yet. Okay, you have the mic. Tianjie, please go ahead. And can you raise of hands so I don't forget who are you? Tianjie and 1, 2. Okay, Tianjie go first, and then you later.
Okay, thank you. I think this is a very timely conversation, right? Because I think we have all this tendency of liking to think of the end of history, right, rather than opening up the history, right? At this point in history, we will think, okay, how Fukuyama was so naive when he thought about the end of history at the end of the Cold War. And at the Bangkok Climate Week, I'm almost hearing another green version of end of history, right? Coming from Chinese industry experts saying that we, China, have figured out renewable energy and all the technologies, right? So there's no point for Southeast Asia to trying to figure out from scratch, right? You just join our ecosystem, you just join our supply chains, because it will take you another 30 years to figure out on your own, right? So I think it's really a timely discussion to open things up a little bit, right? Thinking, okay, there might be other ways forward. But I think that my question is, there's always the risk of the debilitating risk of complexity, right? Because if you ask every expert on activism, they will say you have to simplify things, right? You have to make people choose from evil, from good and evil, right? Because complexity can make people think they cannot act, right? Because this is so complex, and I'm just sitting here to appreciate the beauty of complex without acting on anything, right? So how do you reconcile that, right? Because if you look at the politics today, it's the simplifiers that are winning, right? And if you're talking about, okay, we have to present the complex picture of the future, we have to give people a sea of choice, right? Using the sea metaphor, then they might not act, right? Because it's too complicated. So I'm just putting out this question to our panelists and maybe everybody else. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Noted. And maybe the second.
Okay, thank you very much for the beautiful panel discussion. I learned a lot. And I just have a quick question about some maybe clarification or elaboration about what you talk about, or what Songqiao and Sam talked about, the youth as a instrument, because I attended some movement also in US or China or other places, and I saw lots of young people as attendants and as leaders. And I'm thinking about, what do you mean when you say instrument instead of agency or actor? And why do you say this? What prevent you to think further? Or I don't know, just want some elaboration. Thank you.
I have a question that's related to one of the slides that Stanley had. When you were talking about the metaphors in Ocean Break, one of the things that you have was amnesia versus collapse. So I'm fascinated by the concept of amnesia. And we were talking about history and deep time and how the weight of history bears down on us. And I wanted both Stanley and the panel to give their thoughts on when we can have amnesia, how that can be a beautiful thing. How when we have the ability to forget the weight of the past, what kind of agency does that grant us?
Why don't we start with these three questions? The first one is about complexity, and at the same time, simplicity encourages actions easier. Second is use as an instrument and use as agency. Anyone want to elaborate it? Third one is about the metaphor. Yeah. Who wants to address the first one?
So I'll just rapid fire through all three short answers so that it'll be quicker. Complexity, oversimplify answer, but story. Story is how if you respond to complexity with simplistic directions, you will lose. But if you metabolize the complexity into a story, so think about a novel. A really good novel immerses you in the complexity of a society with all its challenges and contradictions and all those things. A really good story does the same thing as well. So story to complexity. Youth as instruments. The gathering you described is a beautiful example of how youth are not instruments. We call it Seapunk. Punk is really about often young people finding their own agency instead of just playing the music that the big music company wants you to play, right? So what I was referring to, I think we were referring to about like youth as instruments, is that in a lot of the movements and the big corporations, you're just trying to get young soldiers, right? Many young people, ambitious, idealistic, want to work for UN agency XYZ. I would name specifically, right? And they send you out to go and raise money and just ask people for donations in the malls, right? That's instrumentalizing, right? Like I've met many people who volunteered for these things, and they say like in my XYZ years working for this big agency, I never learned anything about the topic I was raising money for. I was just used. Maybe it's unique to that person, right? But this is what I meant in that instrument. So what you've described is actually what I feel young people should be doing more of, which is coming together, potatoing, figuring out how do we find a way of being that allows us to learn and grow. Amnesia versus collapse. Every story, every statement chooses what you forget and what you remember and what you center. And agency is in choosing what we do for that, right? So in a way, strategic amnesia is about figuring out what we need to be important and what is not. And I go back to metabolism. Our body gets all these diverse balanced diet. If I'm low on iron, it extracts more of the iron and does that. And I think this is this kind of process of like amnesia is actually a process of curation, of selection, and of choosing. And if we seek authentically and we're grounded in the context, I feel like we exercise amnesia in a strategic and maybe high agency kind of way.
I can try on the first one. I think if you think about our body, our hands, they are most complex and most simple. And so, I mean, also going to the some running theme of today, right? Agents. When agency is the reunification of our mind and body, right? Agency is the appreciation of future, present, and past. It's oneness in circularity, and agency is where when the dichotomization of simple choices and complexity can be dissolved, because we are centering on the person as the decision that I make at this moment will create the next moment of future. And it could go all directions, right? Your C junction metaphor of that. Now, that is abstract, but we actually do it every day, right? Like when the moment of break comes, your choice of talking to a person you feel interested in, or you want to go pee, or you want to buy a coffee, right? That create your next junction of optionalities that would present you next moment, right? So we all do this. It's actually not that complex and also not that simple, or maybe simple and complex at once.
Maybe quickly on the instrumentalizing, I think we need a collective reflection in the environmental movement, whether it's climate or biodiversity or any other thing. Youth, along with women, indigenous people, are often the last one to consult for or to be engaged with after the agenda, the terminology, and the way to do something is already defined. But actually, these people are stewarding ecosystem, they're creating future. They're very, very often not the first one people go to ask for what do you want? So, you know, when we did a survey last year, and we did a participate research on youth in China and about how they're engaging the environmental movement, they often felt like they're the last one to join because the agenda's already been set. So yeah, what you're experiencing and what we're calling for is different, but that's a way of explaining what instrumentalizing was, because the youth movement, the environmental youth movement, is not about the youth, it's about the environment very often. And of course, there are youth movement that come from completely other side. That's not exactly this. So we're also talking about specific ways that things are done in our industry, so to speak. And I want to touch a little bit on fear, because in our previous 2-day conversation, I was confronted a lot about thinking about fear. And I think this question about complexity versus simplicity is that fear-inducing quality of not knowing what to do. And also the simplicity, the simple story responding to the fear and to say, this is what you do. And also in amnesia and the collapse and this way of not knowing and this fear, this really debilitating feeling of fear. And one invitation is to change the feeling of fear into mystery and curiosity. And it actually is the same physical response where we're in the two different states. When we're curious, we're really not knowing, but anticipating. And also when we're really afraid and not sure what is going to happen. So there's an active dewiring or rewiring that we can do with fear when we're experiencing that. And the second thing is about simplicity. It's actually not that difficult. Like as Seapunk said, we can embody a complex system or be part of the complex system, but we can still be very sure and certain in knowing what we need to do. In a way, an apple tree knows to apple and a banana tree knows to banana. Like no one is questioning. A bird is not questioning their ability to bird, but humans are constantly questioning, how am I humaning? Because I'm thinking, I'm doing, I'm feeling, I'm all of these things, but what should I do? And this goes back to the adolescence part. And I was talking about eco-psychologist Bill Plotkin is saying that after men and women and human beings go through this part of actually finding the soul's place in the world, where we become as like all the other beings in the universe, we know exactly what is our role. And that's when there's no fear. We can participate in the great mystery and in the great complexity with the simplicity of knowing exactly what is our role. And I think that happens with each one of us individually, and it happens with us collectively.
Sorry, Tianjie, I was not happy with my answer entirely. I think
Rewiring. Rewiring.
Yeah, I think one, or actually one, a lot of what we're trying to say today was actually maybe a challenge and also an invitation for us to really rethink what a climate movement should focus on, right? Of course, it has to have the tongues, the science, the technology, and the policy and all those. But at the end of the day, those are innate elements. Those are dead elements. The living element here is the people who actually can bring it to life, right? And so how much is our climate movement is really centering on the human agency of the people, of the constituency, and not just youth as youth, right? But youth as the center of the future, of the present, or indigenous people at the center of the present, right? What is that people center version of the climate movement that we can help to, well, it's already there. It's just not evenly distributed, and how we can pay a bit more of attention to. And I think your organization actually did more than anyone else in our geography on that.
So I'll simply reply Jan's question on amnesia. So in the book, there are different causes of amnesia. For example, cause of toxication of the ocean and of aging or disease for the elderly, and there's one amnesia by choice. So which, for example, the climate refugees, the indigenous choose to forget something to better adapt to new reality. But the problem is, again, like as Sam put it, like is the intentionality and what you choose to remember, what you choose to forget, and how do you reconstruct your narrative and reconstruct your history. So this is the question I raised in the book. I don't think I have a simple answer for that, but I think this is the question many countries, many nations, many post-colonial population are already facing. Yeah.
I would like the final round of question. Can I, because all the three, I gave microphone to the side, so I want to focus on the side this time. Here, show of hands, 1, 2, and 1 on the online. Okay, let's go with the 3, 1. Please be short.
There's a question from E1 online. How do you evaluate the relationships between emerging niche agencies and established traditional dominant bodies in power?
Yeah, it's maybe following on a little bit from your question about sort of the complexity and how to convey that to sort of the ordinary people. We're having an event on Friday, which is all about animation specifically, because we all come from animation, running studios, and we feel it's like a really underused tool in this kind of these new narratives. We can visualize any future we want. We can visualize metaphors. So yeah, I'm wondering what you guys feel is the role of visual media and specifically animation, if there's potential there, and if there's any films, specifically animation films or CG heavy films that have kind of inspired you and that you feel kind of show that potential quite effectively.
Thank you. a very brief reflection on the question on complexity and simplifying, so to speak, at least from the work we've done in South Asia in the last few years. We've realized that if the complexity is contextual, the willingness at least to engage with that complexity is very high. And eventually, yes, we're all people as a singular grouping across the world, but there is no one single grouping, so to say, that this is the constituency, right? Like we are having sub-conversations at the level of sub-geographies, geographies, but also whatever mindsets, so on and so forth. So I'm just saying that seems to be a way to go. My question was, I love the compression to decompression kind of circle between metaphors and stories. That's beautiful. The plug and question I wanted to throw was, eventually this either is already manifested as culture, and culture is never static. It's always evolving, or it manifests into the future as culture. How would any of you see that connective tissue? Because stories are a central ingredient for culture. I'm not saying it's the only ingredient. And yeah, so that's the question, because I will end with, I think it's important because it's it might sound cliched, but culture eats linear logic and strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So.
The first one is like emergent niche action as compared to traditional existing incumbent dominant actions. Second one is about animation. Third one is about culture and you want to maybe use. Oh yeah, okay. Maybe Stanley, you want to talk about animation?
I'm a huge anime fan since kids, so I think there are several, of course, Ghost in the Shell and even Guardian. They have a very complex world building, but they put it in a very genre and character driven framework, and so it's accessible for younger people, but there's so much information in the background. It's just like a cult. You look into the detail if you really obsessed with this. So they did endless research, digging out all these details in the backstage. And I think, yeah, that's something we should do, is not only the medium, but also the design of narratives, and also how we interact with the audience, how you engage with the audience. So it's not like just one shot, but it's continuously ongoing. It's like build up a community to shape this culture. So I think this is a lot could be done on animation. Yeah, I'd love to discuss with you more. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what is the English name? Hayao Miyazaki. Yeah, Gong Qijun. Yeah, Miyazaki. Yeah, and I think like his animations, basically all of them, are very complex, but very simple storyline, and it's exactly about the topic of today, right? It's about agency of young people changing the future that was passed on to them, and they define any definition by whoever imposed on them and chart their own way, right? And you know, it's teenage friendly. I watched him when I was a teenager, and it was fun. Right? It's serious as well. It gets you to think, but it's fun. So I think, yeah, animation have a lot of power in bringing and encapsulating, conveying a lot of the more nuances we talk about today. And then on emergent actions, I think, I mean, again, I think at any moment of history and anywhere, there is always something emerging, right? And it's also where we ask our attention to turn to. Not all these mushrooms will survive. Some of them will die, but some of them may one day become what would later become, let's say, the accepted norm. I mean, if you really think about amazing political equality changes we have achieved over time, like slavery just ended 150 years ago. Actually, one may argue that it's not yet ended in the US, right? Like women voting suffrage rights was less than 100 years in major European countries. And in many countries, still only in name, right? Like stone wall was what, 50, 60 years ago, right? I mean, we what we perceive today as the, let's say, at least from the progressive, as accepted norms, they were radical ideas, unacceptable ideas. They were banned ideas, right? Not long ago. So this agency of bringing to life a future that we collectively want is, you know, every corner of history you turn to is always there. So again, I think maybe the quest right now is for us to look at what are those emerging fragments of the future that is already here, and maybe today this is one of those.
I'm happy to bring out the loops. That, Margaret Wheatley and the Berkana Institute has a 2 loops model. This is in response to the online question. And there's a dominant loop that is actually the current incumbent system that is slowly collapsing. It may be actually rising and going on its peak. One example that people always use is Kodak film actually was always growing until it completely collapsed. And the other one is a historical ice company, which was also sales increasing until all of a sudden everybody started using refrigeration. There's no need for ice. So there is that dominant system on the rise and slowly collapsing. And there's a new emergent system that is slowly emerging. And the beginning stage of that is often underground. And the emergent part, the beginning of the new emergent system, are very often isolated pioneers in the old system. That in the first place, they didn't know each other. They were just innovating in their own ways. And the second step is that these pioneers are connecting and forming networks. And the third stage is that these networks are actually forming networks of networks and communities of practices. And then they start actually growing and expanding and coming overground and becoming the dominant system again. So there's always this, you know, when the tide, one wave is receding, the momentum for the new wave is already being built. So in that way, it's not like a dichotomy of the old and the new, but the new is already embedded in the old. So that's to the online question. And with animation, I feel like I grew up with 2 schools. One is the Miyazaki film schools, and the other maybe Disney, Pixar, kind of American. And I felt like, and at one point, actually in my 20s, I went to look up all of these Japanese animators who are drawing and coming up with these stories. And I'm sure all of you know Doraemon, who came from the 22nd century to come and help someone who's just an ordinary person, you know, and who has all these problems with homework and school, but then there's all these fancy tools and he could just pull out and help. And that's a very friendly relationship with the future. And he didn't say Doraemon came from a future of apocalyptic zombies, but actually Doraemon came from a very friendly future. And in Miyazaki's film, there's a lot of connection with nature. There's a lot of even this castle in the sky. There's like all of these other connections. And I think that is in connection with what is more than human, with what's around us. And the Disney and Pixar movie, also fascinating, lots of really cool things. And as a kid, I always thought about which our Chinese TV series are always about history, about the past, about like what happened in the dynasties. But American movies are always about Superman and what's going on and like one person, you know, all of these other fantasies. But those a big narrative, and this is connected to the culture building. And Stanley talked about the hero's journey. And a lot of us are attracted to the idea of that single hero going on a journey and acquiring new kind of skills and come back and save the world or share the wisdom. But increasingly, we feel the need to shift from the hero's narrative to the village narrative, because the hero never went out for his own sake. The hero actually went because he was in community. And the only reason you can be alone is because you're deeply connected. And the more connected you are, the more you can be alone, and the more you can be yourself, the more you can actually contribute to communities. And I feel like that is a story and a culture that we don't tell enough. We just talk about the individual heroes. We just talk about the danger moment of facing the dragon. And I think in animation, you can do the world building of that complexity, but still connect with that deep human aspect of actually what does it mean to have the courage and to have the connection to the whole. So I feel like, you know, it's very powerful, animation, stories, culture, to shape how we actually think, perceive our friends, the danger we're facing, and the futures we're creating.
That's all question. How much time do I have? Okay, so quick. When you write for a hero or villain, this is to the building on what Songqiao was just talking about. You often have to find some really strong excuse for them to be motivated, right? This is a problem that you can imagine a superhero that's really fast. But the hard part is, like, as a writer, like, why is this superhero who can do whatever he wants bothering to fight this particular cause, right? And it's very telling that it's either I'm trying to save something I love, or I have a really deep psychotic problem, which is what we usually see in all these backstories for all these heroes and villains, right? So you're either crazy or you care about something. And I think that's illustrative. So working backwards in questions, question about culture, contextualization, complexity, all that, agree completely. The only thing I'll add to that is what a story does is that it puts you inside a context, right? You create a character, you put them inside there, and complexity seen from the inside is often a lot easier to comprehend than from the outside or other perspectives. So that's the response to that. Emerging agency versus like incumbents. There's a lot of theory around this. We've heard some different theories. Margaret Wheatley, the rest. Clayton Christensen talks about incumbents versus like disruptors in technology and history like that. But if you look at history, the default is actually of any social change. Changes always start at the edges because the edge and the center is a function of perspective. People fixate on what is familiar before, but the future is unevenly distributed. From the perspective of the new thing, they'll always be in the center, right? So there's this Center for the Edge by Deloitte, which has done a lot of research on this as a historical pattern. Every new center starts off as an edge. Every new innovation, by definition, is a minority. So unless you scan minorities, you will never discover future majorities. So change is the constant, that's Dr. Jing, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so short answer to that. Animation, really interesting. We've heard lots of really interesting stories about references and stuff like that, which, back to metabolism, were Japanese people processing the end of the Japanese world. We got nuked, right? We had the Meiji Revolution. We were the greatest. We were going to take over everything. We're going to unify the continent, right? The idea of a whole Asia actually came out of the Japanese Revolution 100 years ago. And then we got nuked. Everything ended, right? Japanese fiction could have gone really, really bleak and whatever, right? But now instead we got Hello Kitty and Doraemon, right? That's metabolism. That's people thinking through these and still finding cuteness and hope at the other side of that, right? If Japan could do it after being nuked, right? I think that's an inspiration for all of us. But that's the story level. Let's bring it to what can animators do today, right? AI can animate stuff like that, right? And I think maybe one frame I can offer to the gathering tomorrow is don't think about what commodity product animation can make. Think about what perspective and what superpowers you learn to have through the process of learning to animate. And I'll answer this with a history of art. So after photography, it was invented. Artists before photography used to be like, how do I make the portrait as realistic as possible? Capturing light, capturing perspective, the lines and all that. After the camera, impressionism, because there's realities in seeing things as dots and in color contrast that the camera can pick up, right? So perception is the artist's superpower, not painting. And I think there's a similar thing for animation, right? Animation is about seeing potential agency. To animate a horse, you cannot just see the outline or the 2D view of the horse. You have to understand the internal anatomy of the horse. You have to understand the joints, what can move, what cannot move. And that allows the kind of animation that's possible. There's almost like a 3D X-ray vision power in the animators kind of thing. And systems need animations in certain ways, right? So that kind of like systems thinking kind of thing. So I don't know if I have answers for how an animator industry will look at that, but I think it comes from understanding what value and superpower we have and maybe finding ways to explore that.
Right. Thank you. I think that's a round of applause again for the panelists. And then I find it hard to synthesize and wrap up. So let's just finish with short way. Like so I think let's wish for now we are all at the junction of space and time, of choice, of all the kinds of variety of directions and moves we can make. And yet we are also collective movements together. So I would just hope that you can take away some metaphor with you, and then make your choice in that junction and maybe take a deep dive and find something beautiful out of it. And let's finish this panel, which is already overdue. And can we have 10 minutes of break instead of 15 minutes? Is that okay with you? Okay, thank you. Let's go outside, and there's a coffee outside for you. And a group photo for everyone. Okay, can we stay on the chair for another 10 seconds? So that photographer 帮我们拍个合影吧. We can have a group photo. Thank you. 大家这样我的不是谢谢。对对对，让我们和大家在一起。